Commissioner Gordon, Bane has escaped.
Improvement is rarely a journey. It is a rebellion against yourself, against comfort, against the version of you that prefers the illusion of effort over the violence of actual change. Most people don't fail to grow because they lack information. They fail because they refuse to confront who they've been pretending to be. Self-improvement is not about learning new skills or stacking morning routines. It is about burning identity scaffolds. The ones built by approval, by old survival tactics, by watered-down ambitions you convinced yourself were noble. You don't begin to improve until you are willing to commit treason against the life that kept you safe. And the first casualty in that war is your narrative. The story you've repeated so many times, you can no longer separate belief from biology. You don't rise because you read a quote or buy a journal. You rise because you finally look in the mirror and admit, I've been lying to myself. Not once, not occasionally, daily, strategically. You've built systems around those lies, relationships, routines, even career choices that keep your limitations in power. Because if you were to outgrow them, you'd have to admit you wasted years serving the wrong king. And that's the truth most never touch. They'd rather refine the prison than escape it. They'll optimize their mourning rather than confront their meaning. They'll track habits but never examine the self who performs them. Growth is not aesthetic, it is surgical. And the blade must go deep. There's a reason it feels uncomfortable to improve, because every act of self-elevation is an act of betrayal toward your old self. The version of you who coped, who played small, who learned to function with low expectations, he doesn't want to die. He wants to survive in your mind, to keep you contained, to keep the ego safe. And improvement threatens that structure. It calls for execution. It demands that you no longer identify with the man who settled for less. That's why change feels like loss, because it is loss. You're burying the mask you spent years perfecting. You're severing ties with the comfort that once saved you. But evolution doesn't come through safety. It comes through a silent massacre of the roles that no longer fit. We glorify growth, but we don't tell the truth about it. Growth is embarrassing. It reveals how long you've been stagnant. It exposes the false sophistication of your life, how you've decorated avoidance with productivity. You think you're evolving because you've read another book or started another routine. But the truth is, you're still orbiting the same identity, just at a higher frequency. Real growth isn't more, it's deeper. It's the refusal to tolerate your own excuses. It's the moment you call your bluff. You don't rise when the world gives you a better chance. You rise when you stop believing your own performance. The mind craves repetition. It clings to familiar suffering, not because it loves pain, but because it understands it. And self-improvement threatens that certainty. It introduces chaos, new rules, unknown rewards, and the brain resists. It will sabotage you in elegant ways: fatigue, distraction, urgency for minor tasks. It will convince you that improvement is too slow, too costly, too uncertain. But the truth? The mind isn't afraid of failure. It's afraid of no longer having an excuse. Because if you improve, if you really improve, you lose the right to blame the past. You lose the comfort of the narrative. You gain freedom. And freedom is terrifying to those who've built a palace from their pain. Every attempt at growth is filtered through your self-perceive. If you still see yourself as the man who can't, you will bend every opportunity to fit that frame. You will misinterpret success. You will sabotage progress. You'll take 2 steps forward and create a crisis to pull you back, because your psychology is designed to match your identity, not your potential. That's why discipline alone fails. That's why tactics without transformation collapse. You cannot outperform the self you've sworn loyalty to. Until you replace him, until you let him die, you will always find a way back to who you were. Growth is not linear. It is a war fought in the shadows of your mind. Some days you will win through violence, through pushing harder than you ever have. Other days you'll win through surrender, by realizing the obsession with control was the very thing holding you back. The real psychology of self-improvement is not a staircase. It's a spiral, pulling you into layers of yourself you didn't know existed, and each layer will demand a different weapon. Some days it's rage, some days it's grace, some days it's silence, but above all, it demands truth. There will come a point where you're no longer improving for applause, no longer chasing validation. You'll be driven by something quieter, something deeper. A refusal to die a replica, a refusal to let the version of you with potential die at the hands of the version of you with excuses. That's when growth becomes sacred, when it's no longer about being better than others, but about becoming the man you were supposed to be before the world taught you to shrink. Now, when you reach that place, the process stops being optional. It becomes holy. You must understand this. The man you are and the man you could be are at war, and every decision is a vote. Every excuse empowers one, every act of courage empowers the other. You are not improving your life. You are deciding which version of you gets to survive. That is the psychology of growth. It's not gentle, it's not glamorous. It's a violent prioritization of becoming over belonging, of transformation, and it does not begin when things make sense. It begins the moment you admit that the life you tolerate is far beneath what you are capable of building. You are living inside a miracle you forgot to admire. That's the paradox of human transformation. We adapt so rapidly, so seamlessly, that we stop seeing the difference between now and then. It's called hedonic adaptation, a built-in blindness. The mind has evolved to normalize the extraordinary, to flatten the peak once it's climbed. What once felt impossible is now your baseline. You carry victories like background noise, unnoticed, unappreciated, and because you no longer feel the shift, you tell yourself there hasn't been one. You say you haven't changed, haven't grown, haven't done enough. But you have. The problem is not progress. The problem is perception. You've evolved. You just forgot to notice. You scroll through your past and only remember the failures, the stumbles, the near misses. But if you paused, really paused, and looked at the man you used to be, you'd realize how far you've traveled. But the mind resists stillness. It refuses celebration because celebration requires recognition, and recognition would destroy the narrative that you're still behind. That narrative is comforting in its own twisted way. It justifies your frustration. It explains your restlessness. But it's a lie. You're not where you used to be. You've crossed boundaries your former self couldn't even name. You've survived storms that would have broken him. But you never threw a parade for your survival. You moved on. You adapted. And now you're bored with your own breakthrough. The truth, you've become what you once envied. The life you once dreamed of is now routine. But routine has no applause track. So you keep chasing something new, thinking the next milestone will finally make you feel like you've made it. But the finish line keeps moving because the brain is wired to forget the climb. Hedonic adaptation isn't failure, it's biology. It robs your accomplishments of their novelty so you'll stay hungry, but hunger without reflection becomes punishment. You keep pushing forward, not because you lack, but because you've never paused to absorb what you've gained. The body heals, the mind adapts, the soul expands. But you only notice the shifts when they hurt, not when they succeed. Growth whispers, pain screams. That's why most equate change with suffering. They miss the subtle victories, the morning you didn't snooze, the temptation you resisted, the boundary you enforced. These moments don't feel cinematic, so you ignore them. But they matter. They're proof, evidence that the work is working, that your identity has shifted, that your default setting is no longer dysfunction. But you'll never know it unless you look backward with clarity, not to regret, but to recognize. Self-improvement isn't always a roar. Sometimes it's a quiet refusal, a single decision repeated until it rewires your foundation. But you've become so good at surviving that you forgot to honor your upgrades. You navigate new levels like you were born there, but you weren't. You earned this. Every trait you carry now, discipline, calm, discernment, was forged in fire. And yet you act like they've always been yours. That's the trick hedonic adaptation plays. It makes victory look ordinary, so you keep chasing transformation while already living in the results of it. You say you want a breakthrough, but breakthroughs are happening every day. The only reason you don't feel them is because you've refused to acknowledge them. You expect a trumpet, a spotlight, a cinematic shift. But growth isn't theater, it's infrastructure. It happens beneath the surface, quietly, relentlessly, until one day you realize the life you're tired of is actually the life you used to beg for. And that realization should scare you, not because it's disappointing, but because it reveals the blindness that achievement breeds. You've leveled up. You just didn't upgrade your awareness. Reflection is not indulgence, it's calibration. Without it, you lose perspective. You start comparing your current self to fantasies rather than your former self. And in that comparison, you manufacture failure. You convince yourself you've done nothing, when in truth, you've done the hardest thing possible. You changed. In private. Without applause. Without shortcuts. And now you live inside that work daily. It just feels normal. But normal is a trophy. Normal means your system evolved, that the pain you once lived in now feels foreign. But the mind, obsessed with forward motion, doesn't stop to celebrate the distance traveled. It just demands more. So here's your assignment. Pause. Not to rest, but to remember. Walk through your timeline, not with shame, but with reverence. See the patterns you broke, the emotional control you reclaimed, the voices you silenced, the standards you elevated. You didn't just improve, you transformed. And because you did it slowly, you forgot to notice the speed. That's hedonic adaptation. That's what robs you of your own victory lap. You must reclaim it. With presence, with perspective, with power. Your evolution didn't fail, your memory did. You've been measuring growth by fireworks when it's actually a furnace. Slow, steady, intense. That's how you changed. And the man reading this is the proof. He carries the remnants of old versions, the lessons of previous selves, and the weight of victories no one else saw. And still, he doubts. Still, he chases. But today, let that chase include recognition, because you cannot access your next level until you honor the one you're standing on. You have been led to believe that your past is a fixed sculpture, untouchable, immutable, that once an event occurs, its meaning calcifies into your identity and you are forever chained to its interpretation. That is the illusion, the trap. You were never tethered to the experience, only to the meaning you gave it. And meaning is not absolute. It's not concrete, it's currency. It can be reassigned on command, instantly. The same memory that once defined your shame can be repurposed as the cornerstone of your rise. That shift doesn't require years. It doesn't demand permission. It requires ownership. The audacity to say, "That moment didn't break me, it built me." That is not therapy, that is sovereignty, mental dominion over your own history. And most never taste it because they've outsourced meaning to the opinions of others. But meaning isn't democratic. It's authored. And you are the author. You keep waiting for healing to arrive like a slow train, like time alone will liberate you, but time does not heal. It just buries. Healing is a decision, a refusal to let an old story keep dictating your worth. And yes, it will feel violent, because you've built your personality around the pain, around the betrayal, around the failure. To remove that definition is to kill a version of yourself, and you fear that without it, you will become unrecognizable. But that fear is the gate, the threshold, and on the other side is freedom. A self untethered, unburdened, remastered, not because the past changed, but because you changed the lens. They told you your scars were permanent, but scars are reminders, not restraints, and you choose what they remind you of. Was it your breaking or your birthing? Was it the moment everything collapsed or the moment you rose? You decide right now. You don't need a journal, you don't need a coach, you don't need a witness, just a shift in posture, a silent inner announcement. That story no longer controls me. When you say that with conviction, something ancient inside of you reawakens. A version of yourself that was buried beneath interpretation. And that version holds the key to your next evolution. Meaning is the most powerful tool the human mind possesses. It determines whether pain becomes poison or fuel. Most use it like a weapon against themselves, replaying scenes through lenses of guilt, shame, regret. They don't realize they're choosing those frames. No one locked them in. They did it unconsciously, out of habit, out of fear, out of loyalty to suffering. But meaning is fluid, and the moment you reclaim authorship, everything opens. Suddenly, trauma becomes training, rejection becomes redirection, delay becomes preparation. The mind, once a prison, becomes a forge, and you, the craftsman. Mental sovereignty is not a buzzword, it is a blood sport. It means standing over your pain and declaring that it will serve you, not by denying it, not by minimizing it, but by reframing it with ruthless clarity. That heartbreak, it taught you how to discern. That betrayal, it revealed what loyalty really looks like. That loss, it showed you what truly matters. This is not delusion. This is reorientation. You're not lying to yourself. You're rerouting the signal from damage to direction, from victimhood to vigilance. That's the real psychology of self-improvement, not the removal of pain, but the transmutation of it. The people who appear invincible are not unscathed. They are masters of reframing. You see confidence. What you don't see are the years they spent reassigning meaning to their wounds. You see calm. What you don't hear are the internal rewrites of every memory that once haunted them. They don't just remember differently, they mean differently. Their past is not a weight, it's a weapon, sharpened, repurposed, used to cut through future resistance. And they built it not with therapy appointments or mantras, but with the discipline of choosing new meanings over old misery. That choice is available to you every second. You do not owe your past loyalty. You do not need to preserve the original version of every story. You are not a historian, you are a creator. Your memories are raw data. What you make of them is entirely yours. And once you grasp that truth, you are no longer controlled by the timeline. You become the editor. You can recut the film. You can rewrite the voiceover. You can highlight different scenes. And when you do that, the narrative shifts. Not just for the past, but for the future. Because how you interpret yesterday determines what you expect from tomorrow. That's why most people never evolve. They drag old meanings into new opportunities. They enter new rooms expecting betrayal. They form new relationships through the lens of abandonment, and the cycle repeats. Not because they are cursed, but because they never reassigned the meaning that set the pattern in motion. You can stop it, but only if you're willing to rip the old label off the memory and stamp a new one. The moment you do that, everything recalibrates. Identity, direction, potential. There will be resistance. Not from the world, but from the parts of you invested in the old story. Those parts will fight. They'll tell you you're being dishonest, that you're rewriting history unfairly. But history was never neutral. It was always colored by your state, your fears, your maturity. You're not rewriting history, your maturity, the meaning, elevating it, giving it context. That's not delusion, that's evolution. And once you step into that mindset, nothing holds you hostage again. Not heartbreak, not humiliation, not failure. All of it becomes fuel. Mastery does not begin with movement. It begins with stillness. With a glance inward so sharp, it cuts through denial. Before you can shift, before you can elevate, you must first observe. Not to judge, not to analyze, but to see. See the patterns, see the compulsions, see the autopilot version of yourself you've let operate your life in the name of routine. Observation is not passive. It is the most potent act of rebellion, because when you see yourself, you are no longer lost inside the machine. You become the operator. That is where all transformation begins. The moment you watch, you gain leverage. And leverage is power. Power over the loop. Power over the script. Power over the version of you that once ran without question. Before you ever change, you witness. And that witnessing is not casual, it is surgical. You watch the way you speak when you're uncomfortable. You watch the way your posture shifts when you doubt your value. You watch the stories that hijack your mind when no one's looking. And in that watching, you begin to regulate. Not forcefully, but naturally. Because observation brings pattern into focus, and focus activates choice. That's how mastery begins, not with motivation, but with sight. The unflinching kind. The kind that doesn't flinch when it catches your own self-deception. The kind that doesn't retreat when the truth is ugly. You cannot lead yourself. The ego will fight this. It will tell you watching is weakness, that awareness is hesitation. But awareness is not hesitation, it's interruption. The moment you observe a pattern, you interrupt its grip. And in that gap between impulse and action, you find your power. That is the birthplace of mastery. Not in reaction, but in recognition. That's what makes awareness so rare. Most don't want to see, they want to act. Act fast, act impulsively, act without interrogation. Because watching is uncomfortable. It forces accountability. It confronts the illusion that you are the victim of your habits, when in fact you were their architect. You have to be willing to observe without editing, without jumping in to justify or defend, just watch. The way a scientist studies a subject, the way a general surveys a battlefield, from a distance sharp enough to see clearly but close enough to intervene. Most people drown because they never learn to watch their own tide. But once you learn to observe your storms, you no longer drown in them. You navigate them. You cannot control what you cannot see, and once you see, the behavior starts to bend. Because the system cannot run blindly once it's being watched. Self-regulation begins where judgment ends. You don't watch to condemn, you watch to understand. And in understanding, you reclaim the steering wheel.